Welcome to the Baker Tilly US podcast, an online community developed to connect you to our partners and leaders across the globe. Subscribe today to continue discovering new and unique ways that Baker Tilly can enhance or protect your value as we discuss timely, relevant, and impactful topics. Our current series is specific to real estate professionals. We recognize that the coronavirus is affecting real estate companies and organizations across the world in unique ways. In this podcast, we will speak with Baker Tilly practice group leaders about practical real estate guidance to help you through the next several weeks and to prepare your business and employees to come back strong in the future.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Buzz House, our Baker Tilly weekly podcast where you can find all the buzz affecting multifamily housing. I'm Don Bernards, the partner in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice. I'll be talking with my cohort and partner, Garrick Gibson, who also specializes in consulting on multifamily transactions around the country. We've had a few guests in the Buzz House the past couple of podcasts, and we'll continue that trend by bringing in today David Haviland, a senior manager with Baker Tilly, who heads up the firm's market study practice. With David in the Buzz House, we're going to focus specifically on the effect of the pandemic around a couple of areas featuring market studies, including the actual process of the market study, what we're hearing around rent collections, which we talked about a bit on the Buzz House, marketing of properties, and wrap up with discussions about the mindset of renters around design and amenities going forward. But first, Garrick will give a brief summary of current bills introduced in Congress, which would have the potential for being included in the next COVID-19 legislation. We'll be discussing these items in detail on our next Buzz House podcast. Garrick?
Thanks, Don. On June 25th of this year, Senators Ron Wyden and Maria Cantwell introduced S. 4078, the Emergency Affordable Housing Act of 2020. The housing credit provisions in S. 4078 are nearly identical to the provisions included in H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act. So in S. 4078 and H.R. 2, it included a number of provisions from the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, including the following. It establishes a permanent 4% credit rate effective for properties placed in service after January 20th of this year, increasing the annual 9% credit allocation from $2.81 per capita to $4.56 per capita, and an increase in the small state minimum from $3,200,000 roughly to $5,200,000, phased in over 2 years. It also provides a 30% basis boost for rural areas and Native American areas. It'll provide a 50% basis boost for developments serving extremely low-income tenants and provides a separate 10% increase above the state's annual election for those developments. It also allows state housing agencies to designate properties financed with tax-exempt bonds as eligible for a 30% basis boost. In addition, it prohibits local approval and contribution requirements. And then there's a couple of other provisions that are important as well. It reduces the 50% bond financing threshold for 4% credit developments to just 25%. It'll provide LIHTC deadline relief for the 10% test deadline and for the rehabilitation expenditure deadline. It'll allow a credit acceleration election to provide relief during the COVID-19 outbreak. It also repeals the qualified contract option. In addition, it increases the annual state volume cap on private activity bonds from $75 per capita to $135 per capita. It permanently extends and enhances the new market tax credit. It makes improvements to the historic rehabilitation tax credit. It creates a 25% credit for contributions to a housing reserve fund for providing low-income housing supportive services to building tenants. And it also creates a neighborhood homes investment tax credit to encourage rehabilitation of homes in distressed neighborhoods. So those are some great provisions that are definitely much needed in the housing industry. And like Don mentioned, we'll be going over these provisions in detail on the next podcast. But for now, I want to jump into some questions for our guest, Dave Haviland, who is going to share some insight to how Baker Tilly's market study practice is dealing with the pandemic. So Dave, before we jump into specific questions, for our newer listeners, please give us an overview of your practice.
Yeah, hi guys, thanks for having me. I'd like to start off by introducing myself to the listeners. My name is David Haviland, and I head up the multifamily market study practice for the firm. I've been with Baker Tilly since about 2005 and conducting market studies since 2001. Our group focuses on Section 42 and market rate rental research in several segments, including multifamily, senior independent, and assisted living housing on a national basis. Our typical clients include developers where we help to identify opportunities as part of their development team, and then potentially as a third-party source for a market study they may need for a future funding application. We also work with lenders, syndicators, and state agencies where we're helping these groups to underwrite a specific deal as investment.
Thanks, Dave. Let's go ahead and get into some questions. I'd like to start off first with, let's talk about your market study prep. So as you prepare for market studies, since this pandemic has taken hold, what type of adjustments have you been forced to make to your process?
Yeah, Garrick, we've really adjusted our methods of conducting site visits in the near term in order to meet clients' needs while still adhering to federal, state, and local shelter-in-place orders that were or are still in effect. We also are striving to be fully compliant with the principles of social distancing, and we take that responsibility pretty seriously. As a general rule, Baker Tilly prefers not to conduct physical site visits or inspections as part of our engagements. There's been very limited and rare instances we have recently conducted physical site visits, but with several precautions. We're not flying to markets anymore. We will conduct site visits that are within car trip distances. So what does that mean? It's completed within the day, and there's no overnight hotel stays for us anymore. And then when we're in the fields, of course, we're wearing protective masks. We don't have physical or face-to-face contact outside of the office with property managers as we usually did or always did with the property managers to gain an understanding of their property. It's strictly a visiting the exterior of the buildings only, and only one person from our firm at a time. But I will say it would need to be a very compelling reason for us to take on a project that would require a physical site visit, as we are focusing on keeping staff safe.
David, I think all industries and all pieces of our business, multifamily housing, are learning to work, kind of the new normal and so forth. With you, David, and kind of your end users, do you feel that they're comfortable that they can accurately analyze deals and markets without physical site visits?
Yeah, Don, depending on the end user of the study, this has so far been acceptable adjustment to the way we conduct business, as our clients are dealing kind of with the same issues we all are during their due diligence stage of underwriting. So they understand. I will say in one of our latest engagements, a client who typically puts a lot of emphasis historically on the site visit and face-to-face meetings with ownership and management groups arranged for a virtual site visit where via Zoom, we were able to replace our face-to-face meeting and ask questions of the ownership and property management group. And the property manager then used her cell phone to walk us through the property, showing us common area spaces, in-unit walkthroughs, and exteriors of the building. So we were really able to get a good flavor of what the building looked like, the condition of the building, what sort of common areas were available, and the condition of the interior of the units. We would just direct her to show us areas we thought we would need to see, and it actually worked quite well. So, while physical site visits are the preferred method and there are challenges with converting the processes to virtual, that method proved to be the next best thing, I think, and potentially the wave of the immediate future. I will say that we've been conducting market study projects for years that we felt didn't require a site visit, given the advances in online sources of information. So, our products like a limited scope comparability study or preliminary analysis are conducted from our desktop and have proven to be good and accurate sources of data. So even without the site visit, these studies provide our clients with good data and confidence to either move forward with their project or decide the project doesn't appear to be feasible based on their parameters. I guess the takeaway with the question of are the end users satisfied without a physical site visit, we're just being very clear and helping to set expectations of the client early on. This includes the full scope of work, highlighting the confidence level in our research methods, and calling out areas where previous experience has told us we may not be able to get the best data by not physically being there. If they feel a physical site visit is required at that point, we're unfortunately not the group for them at this point in time, but at least we're upfront and all on the same page.
Thanks, Dave. That's very interesting. We're definitely in some crazy times here, which leads me to sort of my next question for you. Here at Buzz House, we do talk a lot about the market impact of the pandemic. So based on your interactions with these property managers that you're talking with, doing your research, has there been any issues on rent collections that you're seeing?
You know, we really, as of today, have not really seen a drastic change in rent collections due to the pandemic. You know, based on our experience and national data published, rent collections have been a bit lower, but not as low as one might expect. So I think there's a few reasons for this, but I think some of the data might be a little skewed. The national data we're all reading is typically accounting for these professionally managed developments, typically market rate or the higher income renter, but doesn't really look at the smaller developments that make up much of the market. This is where some of that payment delinquencies are likely showing up that's really not being counted, I think. And also, you know, the expanded unemployment benefits of an extra $600 per week has been an increase in wages for many tenants, allowing them to stay current on their rent in the short term. But, you know, my opinion is this will get worse as the length of time people are out of work increases. The ability for tenants to keep up with rent payments will continue to be closely tied to the progress made in containing this virus and the ability of employees to safely get back to work and adjust to the new ways of conducting business. You know, unfortunately in the news, and, you know, we seem to be taking a step back in this area. It was hoped that the expiration of the expanded unemployment benefits in July would coincide with people's ability to return to work. And, you know, these recent secondary outbreaks does not lead me to believe that this will be the case. And unfortunately, I feel we'll start to see more substantial decreases in rent collections going forward. And one of my last points to this question, Garrick, is I'm wondering what effective rents start doing as owners start thinking about offering rental concessions on lease renewals to keep these great on-time paying renters in order to reduce some of the costs associated with turnover of renters.
We have a lot of really key points or good points, and that's something the Buzz House will continue to track as we move forward through this pandemic. Even, you know, obviously, again, speaking with property managers, what sort of changes to marketing have property managers been forced to implement, you know, throughout the pandemic? What's the new normal there?
Yeah, Don, well, from a market study standpoint, we've seen very little difference in the availability of property managers via phone interviews, and I think office hours are normal, if not expanded. But we are seeing that unit showings have gone virtual, or they're offering a self-touring option where the tenant can go through a model and walk through a unit on their own. But management might be requiring or supplying masks to prospective residents, as well as a thorough cleaning after the tour. I think because of this, I think we're going to start to see some really great creative websites for developments in order to better serve the virtual tour, give the renter a good indication of what they're getting into by video. And I will say property managers have indicated less foot traffic as people are not wanting to turn over. I mean, it's human nature, right, to wait it out. And I think a good example of that is seniors who are not wanting to risk their health right now to either tour a project or to move from existing locations. So one other thing we're noticing is some of these common areas, or all the common areas, are really that once might have been used to give some marketing sizzle to some of this market rate projects have been shut down. So I'm starting to wonder, will some of these higher end market rate units and the rents start to slip a little bit as higher income renters are no longer willing to pay for spaces they just can't use anymore? But one, you know, overriding point the property managers have said is that it's more and more important for them to clearly communicate to their prospective tenants on how new leasing process will work and to set those expectations, as this is kind of new to everybody. I mean, and that's from showing of the units to executing the leases remotely to future online rent payments. How's that going to look? And most importantly, having a formalized cleaning protocol to be able to convey to prospective residents as they get increasingly asked, how are you addressing the cleanliness of your building?
Thanks, Dave. What about going forward? So given the changes in the mindset of renters, what kind of changes do you foresee in design elements of projects going forward?
Yeah, Garrick, based on conversations with property managers, developers, owners are contemplating the effects of the pandemic on future design elements going forward. So, and that's even the development type. I mean, some are weighing garden style shared corridor versus direct entry design to minimize resident interaction. They're wondering, you know, if given the option, will future residents be hesitant to rent within a building that requires sharing an elevator space and common corridors? You know, as always, site and economics will dictate this decision. I mean, expensive land necessitates a more dense product, but as an example, we've recently worked with a developer of a project in a suburban location with a site size that provided some development style options for him. So he's now working with architects to analyze building design, and maybe not all of the buildings on his site will be one way or the other, but he'll offer a diversified product type to be able to broadly market to households' risk tolerance. Another key point I think we're going to start seeing is the size of the unit. Recent years, we've seen a decrease in the size of units, especially in urban locations. Developers have been able to offer a great location for a slightly more affordable price by decreasing the size of the unit, and then selling the common areas as a meeting place for residents to congregate. So this often promoted tenant interaction. But with social distancing potentially becoming more prominent and commonplace, will tenants be okay with these smaller units and close common spaces, or will units need to grow to compensate for the loss of gathering spaces outside of the units? That's a question that we're going to continue to ask and see how that pans out. I think we're also going to see the resurgence of the plus den, the plus loft, and the plus office units. I would say one lesson the pandemic has taught a wide range of professions, including me, is the efficiency and willingness of employees to work from home when set up correctly and with enough space. So as people continue to work from home, will they need a separate space to work within their unit? Maybe it's not a separate space. Maybe it takes the form of built-in furniture and desks. So that's another point that we'll have to address. Another thing we're seeing from developers is, the addressing package handling and home delivery innovations, given the explosion in online shopping, whether it's dedicated rooms for Amazon packages or simply drop-off areas for restaurant or grocery delivery. I think developers should be giving greater consideration for this already changing way of shopping and ordering in for food. And I think, overall, developers they should just focus on amenities that will be important going forward. I think they should maybe stop stressing the common area, the community rooms, the fitness centers, and the movie rooms, and start stressing security and safety measures, and maybe a shift to private in-unit amenities, something like, a design in the unit. It would make the unit a little bigger, but it would be a small drop zone near the entry of your unit to kind of remove your items and shed during the day after the day is done, to not track through the unit everything you've had with you all day. More smart home devices, keyless entry with your phones, self-flush toilets, simple things like that. And I think the main thing that all these projects it's going to be very important for them to have is super fast Wi-Fi for working from home. It's going to be increasingly important for developers to give that ample thought. And I think, and lastly, the last point I would have on design elements is ample outdoor spaces that would still allow for residents to congregate safely. So rather than the interior common space, it's going to be more of the outdoor grill area, fire pit, gazebo, things like that, where they feel safe being outdoor but still able to congregate.
We have a lot of really, really good considerations, and I look forward to tracking that in design and features as we move forward. As we wrap up today's BuzzHouse podcast, we want to thank David Haviland for joining us and sharing his insights. And of course, please reach out to our colleague Dave with any questions around your market questions or market study needs. As both Garrick and I alluded to earlier on the BuzzHouse podcast, next week we'll be talking about the Senate's Emergency Affordable Housing Act of 2020, along with the Houses Moving Forward Act, and really kind of comparing, contrasting, walking through exactly what each of these points mean that Garrick addressed. Again, thank you for tuning in today. Reach out to Garrick and myself with any questions about today's podcast or brainstorming your multifamily development. And please check out bakertilly.com for many resources around COVID-19. If you have any suggested topics, please send them to build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD@bakertilly.com.
Thank you for joining us today. To receive notification when new episodes become available, please subscribe to Baker Tilly US wherever you get your podcast.